Hi there. Welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. This show has one simple question. What's on your heart and mind right here, right now in this moment? We explore the depths and breadths of our humanity through that one simple question over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. I hope that you'll join us. I hope you'll enjoy the exploration. And this tune was created for me personally by the incredible Peter Griffiths, one half of the amazing Mind Takeaway. Do let us know what you think. Let us know what you take away. And of course, we always welcome challenges too. Hope to see you on the exploration. Hello there. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. Today, I'm really excited to be bringing you a quite exceptional human being in Matthew Reynolds. But before I bring him on, just a very quick share. I just want to make you aware that there is going to be an in-person 3-day executive retreat taking place in the UK across the 5th to the 7th of April 2022. If this is interesting to you or a senior leader that you know, do not hesitate to pass on my details, and I'd love to share what we're looking to achieve together. So let's get on with the show. And I'm going to bring, here he is, it is the Matthew Reynolds. How are you?
I am doing well, Gary. Thank you so much. How are you?
I am doing very well. Like I said, I can't believe, just love the thing about technology, Matthew. Was it 5 o'clock for me and it's
7
what time for
a.m.
you? 7
7
a.m.
a.m. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Well, look, before we get going and I ask that one question to you, maybe you could just give a little overview as to Matthew and what work you're up to these days.
Yeah, most definitely. My name is Matthew Reynolds. My pronouns are he, him, his, they, them, theirs. I am a same gender leveling multi-ethnic warrior. I have been a multimedia performance artist, an educator in the classroom for over a decade. And now I'm offering to the world what I call crafting your equity lens. So it's a 3-day process that I take folks through to actually help them go more intimate with this work, personal work, to be able to truly shift the consciousness of humanity. We see a lot of folks globbing onto the DE&I, EDI, JEDI, IDEA, all these different acronyms for the work with a capital W. And I don't hear a lot of folks talking about the personal, intimate work that it takes. And so I've been fortunate to meet some beautiful folks that have been doing this type of work, social justice work, anti-racism work, anti-oppression work for over 40 plus years. And yet I don't see a lot shifting culturally. So I decided to really look at that aspect of it over the last couple of years since I resigned from the classroom, and I landed on what I have to offer folks. And so I've written a book called Biggest, Fullest, Brightest, looking at this that aspect of shifting the consciousness of humanity. So really looking at how much of our thinking is our thinking? What has influenced the way in which we are treating ourselves and treating each other? And when, as my dear friend Vivian Aqua says, are we, dehumanizing ourselves in the workplace or the places that we're at, that we don't actually see each other's humanity? And so I've really been pushing that and moving that more forward in my life and in my offering and how I interact with people. I really want to leave powerful tools for the next generations to actually pick up and use these tools so that we can get back to being more humanity-led. It's not about amassing wealth. It's not about these creature comforts, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing wrong with those things. And yet, if we're not looking at each other's humanity first and we're just stomping on each other to get there, I think there's a problem with that. And I think we're starting to see that in the world with, climate change and all those things happening and all that starting to affect each other. And its borders are like, the Mother Earth and all of those things don't care about borders. And so it's starting to truly affect folks. And we look across Africa and some of the droughts and things that are happening there right now, and some of the high temperatures we've seen on other continents, and some of the massive storms we've seen and stuff. It's also interconnected. And we as human beings, as humanity, we need to start looking at it more from a humanity perspective and not necessarily from a greed perspective. So that's a little bit about me. Thanks, Gary, for having me here.
Oh, wow. What an incredible introduction. And I have to say, how I found Matthew, and his work was on Clubhouse, and it's just, I'm so intrigued, Matthew, by your work, because I have a tension quite often myself in this. Am I doing enough? Should I be? No, what do I have the right to say as like a cisgendered white male? What do I not have the right to say? And it can seem like a minefield. And a lot of people say, just ask more questions, stay curious, and that's enough. Would you challenge or build on that? I'm really curious.
All right, so let's unpack some things, right? When this idea of colonization began, when we look at the Dark Ages and the 1,000 years of that, and how religion was weaponized and used as a tool to spread out and say that this is the only way of thinking, this is the only way of being, this is the only way of doing, which killed thousands of people, which, you know, shifted the power dynamics to a patriarchy, which, you know, really started to exacerbate and really look at this idea of a hierarchy as well, not only a monarchy. And so as we dove into that, as far as humanity goes, we started to think that that was the way and the only way of doing things. And we started squelching other ideas that thought differently than that. So Edgar Villanueva, who's the author of Decolonizing Wealth, he calls it colonizer illness. And that really helped me when I was reading his book in the last 6 months to really have empathy and compassion towards other folks, that this is actually an illness. It's an illness that has affected us all, that we've all gotten. So as that colonization happened, as that thought process happened, as we constructed, the greater we of humanity, constructed the words white and whiteness and its characteristics, which then created black and blackness, or people of color, and put this big wedge of division in between, saying you are lesser, we are greater, et cetera, and then had this language that keeps getting used over and over and over again, which keeps getting used over and over again, which we start internalizing, which we started ingesting. And that's the way that we start seeing the world around us. We start upholding those ideas, which aren't my ideas. That is not the way that I choose to see other people. There is no superior and inferior. There's only the human race. There's only human beings. And look at how diverse and beautiful we are in our skin tones and eye colors and hair textures and all of these different ideas and the ways in which we see the origin of the earth and all of its power and magic. And just like we keep seeing all these different things, but instead of celebrating those, this supremacy culture comes along and tries to get rid of it through genocide, through starvation, through all these various things. We're going to take your wealth. We're going to get you to think like us, so that white supremacy culture, the dominant culture, is being upheld without us even knowing that we're doing it. And it's the mindset that keeps happening. Oh, you live in America. Oh, I heard the streets are paved with gold. I heard everybody's got a car. I heard this and that and all these, and that you don't have racism, you don't have sexism, you have all these freedoms. Well, then why is there a law right now in Florida that's saying don't say gay and trans? And you think, oh, that's great. We're squelching the bullies, and the bullies aren't going to like use those words in school. No, it's to keep those schools from passing laws or passing rules and regulations that keep bullies from actually using those words. It's their way to make sure that you don't, as a LGBTQIA plus student, you don't have basic rights. You don't have any rights at all, because people can't talk about it. They're coming at it at the language perspective. And so then what's been on my heart and mind, tying that into the question for today, is I've got these big organizations, right? I see you a lot on LinkedIn. I'm there as well. So these large corporations that are rainbow washing during the correct month, right? And they put all their rainbow gear out there. So let's take Target, for instance, right? They do a great job. They have a whole section that is Black History Month, that is for the Pride Month, that they have certain sections in their store. They did all this branding and marketing and everything around it to make them seem like they're an ally. And those are actionable steps. So where's your statement, Target, right now about this law in Florida about don't say gay and trans? Why aren't you putting your voice behind something as large and political as that? And I say that to all these organizations, not just Target, but Coca-Cola and all these other places that want to be hip and cool and want to like, oh, we want to speak to the next generation. And oh, they find social justice in this, a big thing. So how can we get them to come work for us? Or how can we get them to do this? Oh, we need to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion director. Oh, we need to do this and we need to do that. But it's all coming through this filter of money. And it's all coming through these filters of how we can become this big juggernaut in this world global economy kind of struggle. But when it really comes down to it and standing up in a political way, I don't hear you all speaking right now when these things are occurring. And you want to put up your Black Lives Matter statement or your anti-racism statement and stuff when another black-bodied or person of color is murdered in plain sight in the US. But I don't see you doing anything when it comes to the laws that'll actually change this kind of rhetoric in our country and globally, because we bamboozled everybody else into believing that this is the way, right? Mandalorian, excuse me, throwing that out there. I just watched. Anyway, I'm off on this tangent kind of thing. But that's the thing that's been on my heart and mind lately is I really see the monetization of something that I strongly believe in, and that's becoming more humanity-led, but it's leaving that aspect out again. All the folks that I talked about that I've been seeing doing this work for 40 plus years, don't come to me and say, oh, ED&I is an $8 billion industry now. You can make a lot of money doing that. I do this so that I hopefully in 10 years what I'm doing is insignificant and doesn't need to be done anymore because we've shifted our consciousness to be more humanity-led. And what would that do? What would we become if we were allowed to be our biggest, fullest, and brightest? That I didn't have to get through and uproot all this internalized racism, internalized homophobia, internalized superiority, internalized capitalism. If I wasn't left these gaping wounds that get filled back in with white supremacy culture ideology, but actually gets filled back in with seeing other people's humanity first, what could we become? And that's what I want. And it may not happen in my lifetime. So I do all of this for 7 generations to come. But that's been kind of what's been in my heart and on my mind these days lately, Gary. I hope there's somewhere in there that you can grab onto.
Oh, it's so powerful, Matthew, because you've a lot of my education, self-education, and also education. I have a systemic guide, Samantha Sapaya, based in the Philippines. And she's been incredibly helpful for me to really sense, not just at a head level, but at a body level, what's going on with this stuff. So like when you get that reaction in your body, in your torso, or the back of your neck, like that is your body speaking to you. And we've not been taught, I wasn't taught, certainly growing up in the West in the UK, that there's this much more complex, energetic sort, we're made of stardust, right? We all are, regardless of the outside differences that we should be celebrating. I agree, but it really feels like we've massively overcomplicated what it means to be human, Matthew. In summary, and I'm not at all diluting, like you say, the colonialism, the racism, the supremacy that does still exist, and it does. But I do also agree with you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is one of my biggest tensions has been, we are all made of the same stuff. We definitely don't have equal access to resource and opportunity. How do we bridge that? How do we actually invite those with power, status, and access to give some of that away? I want to give more of what I've had for free away, and it's really hard to do in a system that upholds my way of being without me having to do anything.
Right. And I think, and you're touching on okay. Love this. So there's nothing. It used to really hit me emotionally when I would watch a white-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual friend realize what equity truly means. And I see in their look and in the questions that they're asking me, oh, So let me see if I get this. The privileges that I had growing up, my children are not going to have those same privileges if I vote for or change these laws, or we truly build an equitable space or have equity at its core. Yeah. And I can see in their eyes that it's like, I'm down for the cause, but I want my children to have better. And so behind that closed curtain at voting time, they may not check that box. They may not raise their hand. They may not actually verbalize how they're feeling. They may not continue to spread that idea. It may stop with them because they don't want to give up this made up power. And that's the real thing, is that these things that we call power, it's all a construct and it's all a lie. It all has been. And then it's been, what's been placed behind it are these weapons of mass destruction. That's how people got more powerful, is that they went from rocks and spears and arrows and bows, and then we manufactured and created guns and these other things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so that it became this whole race of who could kill more people first. What? Really? That's power? Is how many people I can annihilate first and foremost, instead of how many people I can inspire, encourage to be curious and use their creativity that they were born with, that's inside them, to expand humanity into its biggest, fullest, and brightest. Excuse my language, but that's fucked up. And I don't subscribe to that, and I don't want to subscribe to that anymore. I don't believe that ideology. So that's what I'm doing. I'm saying the things that we say are power, and people who are in these positions of power, you don't have no power. You don't have any more power than me. And it's like, if you want to come knocking on my door with your guns and so on and so forth, then we'll deal with it when that day comes. But right now, I'm not going to give you any more of my power, because we want people who vote in our best interest, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then guess what? At least here in the United States, why are there only 2 political parties for 360 million plus people? And how long has that been? Right? And I lived in the Netherlands, and there were 6 major political parties that sat on their democratic parliament when I was living there in the late 90s. So and they've got what, 1 million, 2 million people, something like that. I don't understand this concept that people can't see that, and how we have been bamboozled into divide and conquer so quickly and so easily. The whole pandemic, the masks versus no mask, vaccinations versus anti-vaccinations, etc. And there's just this list of things that constantly put us on this binary, these 2 points, which is so limiting and so disrespectful to how much more we have inside our brains and in our hearts as human beings, that we only have 2 points of reference for any given subject. What? Come on now. I don't subscribe to that ideology. I want us to go beyond, and I want us to expand. I don't want this hierarchical level thing that I've reached this new level, or I'm on this next level, or I'm on this next. No, we are expanding. If you want to talk about stardust, isn't that what our universe is doing? Isn't it just expanding out? Why can't we be that same thing, expanding out as big as we can? And it's not necessarily that bigger is better. And yet, if I'm not given that as an option, right? Which we're not right now.
God, honestly, my whole back of my neck, as I said earlier about reactions, the whole back of my neck is just reacting to everything you just said, because, like, really, Matthew, it can seem, is the old mechanistic reductive view of the world. What you just shared, there'll be people going, "Oh, that's too utopian. Oh, that's not possible." But that is our innate state, right? When we come into the world, blissfully as a small tot, we are nothing but energy and curiosity and wonder and love and connection, right? And then we learn, we get socialized away from that until we hit the workplace going like, I'm 1/100th of what I was when I was originally born. And now we're like, oh, actually, I can be that wondrous, curious, open-minded, open-hearted, connected human. But it's almost so far away from what we're being conditioned to believe is possible that we subscribe to that, and then, as you say, then we uphold white supremacy, then we uphold racism, and then because we're just not prepared to believe we've got power within ourselves internally. Like,
so when you ask yourself the question, how much of your thinking is your thinking,
which
and
I
you
love
start
that question.
and you start looking around throughout your day, and you start going, oh, that's a limiting belief. That's a limiting belief. That's a limiting belief, because it places me on that binary. And when you say utopian, it's like, yeah, those are buzzwords, right? Those are buzzwords that get us once again to think that it has to be a particular way. Utopian, everybody has this glazed over smile and everything is going to be great every single day. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not talking about that whole, what people will say is woo woo or kumbaya or this or that, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, how about it's just being human? How about instead of believing that it is only this or that, that I'm more well-rounded than that? That it's not just sadness and happiness and anger, but there's like these ideas of being more intellectually stimulated to be like, I'm feeling a little more this or that or the other thing. Those ideas of those emotion wheels. I don't know if you've seen one before, but where there's multiple words that are being used around it, right? It's not just those inside parts, that it has to be good or bad, right or wrong, happy or sad. It's like, no, we are much more complex than that. And all of that needs to be embraced. And all of that needs to have its time in the sun. But we won't even let that happen, because then you have people who come along and do exactly what you just said and poo-poo it because it's too utopian or it's too woo-woo or so on and so forth. It's never happened. So why don't we just let it be what it's going to be? Instead of having these borders, instead of doing these things and saying, I own this and you don't have that, so you're lesser than. Why is anybody on this world hungry? Why? No one should be hungry on this planet. There is plenty of food everywhere. Now, water, we've messed up. We've messed up in a big way. And I think that, that's going to be the place. If there's going to be a third world war, I think that's what it's going to be over. And sorry to switch on a dime there kind of thing, but that just
not at all
through my mind. It's like, come on, people. What are we leaving 7 generations from now? And I'm not having kids by personal choice. Other people are. And I look at the way you treat the planet and stuff. It's like, aren't you thinking about what you're leaving your great, great, great grandchild? Because you're not. Because a lot of that ideology, at least on the North American continent, we killed. We, the greater we of the folks who created the United States, right? We killed those thought processes, those stories, that ideology with the massacre of the indigenous peoples who are still here and who are still fighting to go to those ways and utilize those ways to help humanity become its biggest, fullest, and brightest. Why aren't we listening more to folks?
So this is just beautiful, Matthew. And the reason why, so I, on many, many levels, thank you for showing up as your biggest, brightest, boldest self, because again, my guide in the Philippines, again, I'm very conscious not to co-opt or to take other people's views as my own. So I want to just frame that. But what's really important is I work in the chemicals industry, right? I work in one of the most extractive, toxic industries, but it touches every part of humanity as of today. So part of my way of trying to be the biggest, boldest, brightest is to try and drive an inside-out industry discussion around this very topic, right? And I then look at Ecuador, where they passed last week for the first time in history, indigenous people that are actually looking after something like 80% of the biodiversity of the planet have now got the final say on what gets developed on their land or not. Finally, as of last week. This sort of stuff, like you can't have a conversation about business without talking about indigenous people and without talking about interconnectivity and without talking about the weather and without talking about water, which I think what you're speaking to brilliantly, right? If we're not considering every part of our interconnected ecosystem, what are we even talking about?
Right? Well, and don't let me get all Gene Roddenberry on you here. Star Trek. It's like, well, why are we doing these things? For what reason? To amass wealth, to be paid for what? For what? If we got rid of money, right?
It is made up, right?
And well, I mean, what Edgar Villanueva talks about is using money as medicine, because it's just paper coins, numbers on a screen for, you know what I mean? It's just these ideas. But if we used it to help be more mindful of what that money is going into. But Star Trek, it's like, I don't know if a lot of people know, there's no money. And so what did it do with, if everybody was getting food and water and shelter and had all those basic needs met, basic healthcare, et cetera, think of all the energy that we put into one human being in their lifetime, into those things. How much energy we put into just those things to basically live. What would we do with all that extra energy? Well, in Star Trek, they're flying out into outer space. They're searching other new worlds. Why? And people are like, well, that's all fantasy and blah, blah, blah. Why? Why is it just fantasy? We don't know what we can become because we've caught ourselves on this catch-22 of supremacy culture, and we think that that's the way. And it's not. It is not the way. It is actually what is, to me, in my judgment, careening us very quickly down that path of death and destruction, where there won't be anything left. Why is greed amassing wealth? And then there's people out there, well, I want to have a nice car. I want to have a nice house. I want to have these things. Why? Which brings us back to the old saying, you can't take it with you. Well, I want to leave it for my children so that my children have this and that, et cetera, so on and so forth. But why do we have to be more than someone else, than our neighbor? Why can't we focus more on helping our neighbors be just as big and bright, their fullest as they can be? And if we're doing more, and this is my theater training coming out, right? Who's the most important person on the stage? The other person, right? And there's a lot of indigenous people as well, you know, talking about turkey medicine, the giveaway, et cetera, et cetera. It's always about the other. Because if I'm taking care of them, all that energy I'm giving out this way comes back to me from all those people as well, because they're giving out as well. Why are we on this planet? Is it truly just to amass wealth and say, I'm more than you because I have all these things and you're lesser than? Ha, ha, ha. Aren't I great, king of the hill? No, I don't think so. Again, I don't subscribe to that ideology. It's not about that. It's about, for me at least, what can we become? Why aren't we in our meditative practices floating 2 feet off the ground while we do it? Why can't I telekinetically, you know, reach out to somebody else and like come together in that sense and be speaking with them? What about these miracles that occur that we see, you know, through stories from way back when there wasn't all these vibrations and things getting in the way of us truly being connected to the planet? And then people want to say, oh, that's all woo woo, and be dismissive. Why not look at it though? Why not? I mean, we've bought into this other ideology so easily. We've internalized it to the point that we're watching our planet die and don't know what's going on for the next generations.
It's, you know, sometimes we looked at, I want to keep you for 3 hours, Matthew, but it's so practical. Like what you're sharing though is like, just to come back, just as we start to round out, the potentiality is abundant, right? And I just want to point to what you've so beautifully, yes, we could go exploring, but what about exploring internally first? My own journey the last 6 years, honest to God, Matthew, the outside looks exactly the same, right? Same job, same relationship, married to the same wonderful human being, right? All of the outside view looks the same. Internally, I've expanded 100x. My capacity to connect, to understand, to sense, like, and it's getting bigger, right? like we are all of that already. And I'm just like, what a great invitation you're offering. And finally, I'd love you, please speak a little bit about the equity lens. So how are you serving and supporting people with that inner exploration through your equity lens? If I may ask you to share a bit about that before we disappear today.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for bringing it to that. So as I spoke before, I started looking at all these things and wondering, well, what tools do we have? Being in education, that was one of the things. You would go to an educator conference and you wanted something to be able to take back for that next Monday to help you with those handful of students that you just couldn't reach, you were seeing them start to fall through the cracks. So you wanted that quick fix, you wanted to be able to put it in there so that you could catch them so that they wouldn't fall through, kind of thing. And then you can start weaving it more through your lesson plans and actually plump it out a bit more. But you wanted the quick all, the fix all, and not necessarily a Band-Aid, but something that you knew you could later on really put into your lessons and stuff. And so when I looked at that, I was like, well, there's a tool in there. And it isn't necessarily just the Band-Aid, even though some people, it was a Band-Aid for them only. So then I started looking at that when it came to this idea of creating equity, of creating spaces of unconditional belonging. And so when I started looking at that, it was like, I'm looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
How am I looking at that? How much of my thinking is my thinking that causes my looking to shift? How much stimuli in the outside world comes up for me, right, and triggers me or places me someplace else or has this emotional reaction, my vagus nervous system gets tingly and starts going because this might be an unsafe situation, and how much of that is truly my own? And so then as I started to self-reflect on that, just as you said, it's a lot of introspection. So my first day in my workshop is introspection. My second day is a deeper dive. And we call that day self-reflection, a deeper connection through self-reflection is the second day. And then on the third day, we actually craft our personal equity lens. And then you can't have this tool without accountability. And so there's accountability that also is in that third day. So it's this idea, and that's very basic, but if you go to my website, there's a 5-step that asks more questions than anything, that kind of lays it out a bit more. But for me, the overarching idea of an equity lens, and now my eyes are going to go up here because I have it on my wall, our definition. And so I'm going to read that for you really quickly. Our definition of an equity lens: something crafted by the individual, utilizing their own lived experiences. It must be ever evolving as one meets new people, has new experiences, gains knowledge and wisdom, and recognizes what their own definition of anti-racist work is. It must be something that grows into being your truth vision. It has integrity, accountability, responsibility, vulnerability, hard work, self-worth, and unconditional love at its core. It is building unconditional belonging. It is a call to action. And a lot of folks, that right there, they're like, Matthew, it can't be that simple. I can't just write this thing. I am crafting a world, right? I am crafting a world. I am crafting a world. It can't be that simple that I just say this. It seems like, these manifestation mantras, et cetera, they kind of poo-poo all the hard work that I've put in and that I do all the time. I kind of pride myself in work. Trust me, I'm on my 15th equity lens now because it's ever evolving, right? It's always changing. We don't tell you what your equity lens should be. You come in and you are responding to the way that we've structured our workshop, to videos, articles, conversation, what people share, what people choose not to share. There's a lot of self-reflective writing. There's a whole journal that you take with you on this journey that you go through. And then you are challenged at the end, invited at the end to read it every single day, because we have to. Because for hundreds of years, we've been fed this idea that This is the only way. This is how you're supposed to look at things. They're better than you, you're lesser than, or you're greater than they are, etc., etc. All these things, all those binaries, they don't just disappear because you've gone through the workshop. You have to do your personal work. You need to read your equity lens every day. And as you read it, your vision shifts. I read mine before this. I read mine when I woke up. I've read it 3 times already before even getting on with you. And that's 7 a.m. I have another meeting after this. I'll read it again. I have some emails I have to answer. I'll read it maybe before every email or before I sit down before it. And it's, for me, it helps shift and uproot those things and not fill it back in with supremacy culture, but fill it back in with the world in which I want to craft, how I want to be treated, and how I want to treat other people.
Wow. I'm so excited. We've been talking for a while about trying to get a European cohort to go through your equity lens, and I'm hoping it's coming soon.
To be honest, Gary, we're looking at the end of May, beginning of June.
Brilliant.
So,
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll keep you in touch.
Make sure you do. And again, Matthew, thank you for sparing the time, your early morning. You're a joy, you're a light, and I just want to appreciate you for showing up in your wholeness and showing us that it's possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Peace of mind, peace of body, peace of spirit.
Thanks, everyone. If you watched us live or you watched this back, please do check out Matthew and his work, mrrconsulting.org. And if you want to check out my website, hexochange.now.com. But until next time, Matthew, keep shining. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.